Hi, Chris. My name is Brandon,
Hey,
and
Brandon, how you
I'm
doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good.
That's great.
I got the that's why I'm not at Comic-Con, so I'm at my house.
Very unfortunate. I'm sorry that that's what happened.
What happens?
But yeah, I am the owner of NYC, the YouTube channel, so I cover a lot of all things downtown. It's an honor to actually interview you, the creator of Downtown. This is actually a really cool experience for me.
Right
Um,
on.
So yeah, we'll just get right into it. So the first question I would like to ask, who are you and what are you known for?
Well, I'm Chris P, cartoon guy. I think people know me for Titmouse, the animation studio that I kind of accidentally started. And we make a lot of shows probably now. I don't know. I'm trying to think, maybe Venture Brothers, Big Mouth are probably two that are the most known. Metalocalypse, Scavenger's Reign, which is I really like, is kind of a cult hit right now. But the first show that I got on the air was Downtown back at MTV before I had a studio. So, and now seems to be people like it, which is cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would say that my generation, yeah, we really like that. So I would say that especially, due to the there was a lot of like online learning, right? A lot of my generation, they really wanted to be out and about, right? They really wanted to make those connections. And so when we look at a show like Downtown, we see that we're like, wow, we want to be a part of that. We want to make friends just out in the street like that. So would you ever return to Downtown, whether it's a second season, a reboot, or a complete spin-off? And this question was asked by at Mr. Kingslayer 2964.
It's something that has come up here and there. And the more time that goes by, it's interesting. I would. It's something that I'd have to consider. We like Metalocalypse was down for a while, and then was brought back with a movie. Same with Venture Brothers. But those shows live in a world that is less real than Downtown. Downtown is meant to be that like time capsule. Like came up when I was like started to get in when I figured out I wanted to do animation and went to New York to like study animation in our school. I watched a lot of Ralph Bakshi films from the 70s, and especially like films like Heavy Traffic felt like they were like really, really encapsulated New York in the 70s. And with Downtown, I really wanted to like take a snapshot of that moment of like New York in 1999, right? That's what I wanted to look like. I wanted, just like I was watching films from 20 years ago, animated films about New York in the 70s and the 90s. I wanted people 20 years later to watch Downtown and be like, wow, that really feels like the way it felt back then. And it worked. I can't believe it worked.
Definitely, yeah.
But so that's the question, right? So I don't think I'd want to do a show of like the downtown characters all grown up in the year 2025 or whatever, or 2026, if we, depending on when we would get this thing together. I don't think I'd want to do downtown New York now with a new set of characters. It's so different now. Like Ludlow Street and that whole scene that I would hang out in feels very, very, very different than what it was, in the 90s. So I think the way to do it is almost do it like a classic, like make it about that same era, but might have to come up with a new cast. Like maybe it's a new cast. Maybe there's one or two from the original cast that pop in every once in a while. Originally this thing, when I originally pitched it, I intended to have no regular characters. I was really inspired by Slacker, Linkletter's film, which if your audience hasn't seen that, you should go see that. He shot it in Austin, Texas, and it basically was just people walking around, kind of followed a character around, but you kind of went from one to the other, and it was really like a cinema verite, and I really thought we were going to record real people on the street and animate their stories. But as it got sold and as we progressed, when you deal with a network and they have their needs, I'm happy because they greenlit it. It wouldn't have been made if MTV didn't want to put millions of dollars behind this thing, but they did say like you got to have scripts, you got to have regular characters, it's got to be a comedy. Those are all things that I didn't want to do originally, but I think it helped. It helped in the long run. So yeah, I guess that's a long-winded answer, but I think yeah, I would do it. It's just like threading that needle. Another movie I was inspired by was Kids.
Yes.
So it's interesting because Harmony Korine wrote that, who's my age and was in like like overlapping circles with me in New York back then. But Larry Clark was my age now back then. So I think that might be a key too, whereas like Larry Clark and Harmony made that thing work because Larry had experience as a director, but Harmony really gave it the authentic voice of New York of that era, which I understood because I was that kid, you know. That was a nerdier version of it. I never got good at riding a skateboard. I tried to skate and I sucked. Um, the uh so I'd probably team up with somebody and kind of thread that needle. It's a little different because it's like we'd want to have them have the voice of the late 90s but have the energy of somebody who's in, you know, their teens or early 20s. So I don't know. That's probably, who knows, but I keep
Right.
answering it. You asked that question, I'm still answering it.
That's a really good answer.
Hello, Chris. My name is Isabel, and my question for you is there any character or episode you're particularly attached to? And if so, why?
I made the animatic, had a couple shots that were animated in it. It was all the teenagers, you know. That was really who I initially intended to make the show about. But as we started writing, really wanted to make a character that was closer to my experience in the city, you know, and I was in my mid 20s at that time. I think it was 25 at that time. And that's when George Christic and I kind of, you know, collectively put our experience into Alex. You know, he was more the representative of like, you know, a kind of nerdier, more awkward person in that I'd say the artist angle. I probably wanted to be Matt, but I really was Alex, you know, in reality. And you know, in the comic book nerd guys, like Alex's friends were kind of like an amalgam of some of my group of friends, you know, that we made like way more horrifying and nerdy than they actually were. That's how we saw ourselves, basically. You know? Um, but as far as episodes, so two episodes, I think, like the Insomnia episode, because that's an Alex episode, and
Mhm.
also let us play with, you know, kind of a little bit more surreal take, you know, when he's like kind of hallucinating, when he's on so little sleep, you know, that feeling that you have, you know, when you're a little bit more free. When, you know, I did a lot of all-nighters back then, both in school and working at MTV. You know, I kind of worked two jobs. I would work, you know, during the day on shows like Beavis and Butthead and Daria doing storyboards, and then at night, like animating commercials and stuff. And then because I was also in my 20s in New York, I was out late every night, pretty much. You know, nobody has a nice apartment. Everybody meets out in the world. Whereas I find I live in LA now and people meet at their homes. You know, it's a
Mhm.
way different vibe. You don't see people when you, in New York at the time, and still now to a certain degree, you would see people when you were on your way. You'd see way more people on your way to your destination than you would at your destination. Here in LA, you see more people at your destination than you do on the way. You're like stuck in your car or whatever. But anyway,
Mhm.
so that's one episode. And then another episode is before and after. I really enjoy that one because that one was controversial in the writers' room, right? Kind of was divided half and half of like one of the stories in that, you know, was the Chaka had like taken a Polaroid of like the before and after state of her. It's like, would somebody do that, right? And it's like, I don't know. And when it went up all the way up to Abby Turkuli, who was the head of MTV Animation at the time, he was like, this is exactly the kind of episodes that we should be making because Beavis and Butthead was doing well, and he perceived that like so-called edgier content was going to work, but it wasn't the edginess that half the writers' room was divided on. It was the authenticity, right? Because we always went with authenticity. And I remember Ann Bernstein, who I love, was like, I don't know. I don't know if a teenage girl would do this. So we go and do the table read. We would always have them do a table read before because we wanted them to change anything that they felt like was not authentic to their characters because they really were more than any other show, their characters. Leora Zuberman, who played Chaka, was like, "Oh my God, are you following me around with a secret camera? This actually happened to me." And I was like, there's our authenticity right there. Because I think in the pre-smartphone era, it was like kind of like, snapping a pic and sending it to your friend and then it gets forwarded around, right? But it was before that existed because it was a Polaroid and she was afraid of it getting out there. And it's interesting because that was the episode we submitted for an Emmy, kind of like a because I assumed we would not get nominated for an Emmy, and then we did get nominated for an Emmy for that episode. Another thing I like about that episode is it was back in the day, when you printed out scripts, when you asked for clearance, you would print out a script, and like FedEx it to somebody. You didn't like email a script and have them printed it. It just wasn't as digital. People didn't read scripts on their screen, and the computer screens were real. We also used Cookie Monster, which we had to get permission from
Mhm.
Sesame Street, a kid's show in that episode. And I was like, man, let's just put Post-its on all the pages with Cookie Monster and highlight every instance of Cookie Monster and like not mention what the overall plot is. And when we got approval, and I assumed that they didn't read any of the other pages because I don't know if they would have approved it if they knew what the episode was about.
What do you remember of the scrapped second season of Downtown?
Remember is tough. We were at the point where we had written like kind of premises for each episode, which is just like, like a paragraph. So I think that's as far as we got. We didn't get too far down the line. So it was like, I know we were branching out into some other like side characters. Like I think we were gonna do an episode that focused on like Alex and his like kind of nerdy sidekick friends from the comic shop. Can't remember what the premise was. I do know, like originally, because we had a much bigger cast in the original version, like there was we were trying to represent a lot of different aspects. I mean, one of the things about living in New York, especially at the time, was there were so many different cross sections of different kinds of people. And the we had to cut the cast down when we made it regular characters, when we were kind of conceiving of it as more of a slacker kind of show where you just went from thing to thing. There were a lot of, there was like, I don't know, like 30 characters or something. They'd overlap. You'd see them like come in and out, but you didn't follow many of them. So what I'm getting to is there was a character where Alex had a neighbor, like, across the hall from him, who was, an openly gay person, but we weren't going to treat it as a joke or anything because at the time you have to put your mindset back into the like mid to late 90s, and it was
Mhm.
not common to have a gay character on TV, and definitely not in a cartoon, and definitely not in a way that you would make their sexuality part of the comedy of it, right? We just wanted to like matter of factly just have them be hanging out and not make it a big deal. Jody Schaefer, who's one of my college friends and worked on Downtown and many other shows with me, you know, is a character like that, just like a kind of dude who doesn't present as gay, but he is. And, you know, he was definitely instrumental in helping figure out that character that we never used. But we would have explored him in a second season. There was also kind of like a businessy character, like somebody who was trying to make it in New York, kind of like in a more like Wall Streety kind of way. Somebody who, I forget her name. I think Claire. I think,
Clara? It was like
yeah,
Clara or something. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's really interesting you bring that up because I saw that in the bonus features of the DVD.
yeah,
Like the sketchbooks or like the concept art that you had like a
yeah.
woman and she did look like a businesswoman.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
interesting you brought
Claire,
that
I
up.
think was her name. Yeah. And she was going to be someone who was tracking like a different kind of, because pretty much everybody in the show was hanging out, like what didn't like wasn't on a career trajectory, but she was the character who was going to try to like make it in New York somehow. So we probably would have explored something like that. We absolutely would have explored a kind of like, Alex, Jen, Serena triangle that we were setting up without a doubt.
Interesting. Were there any ideas that didn't make it into the first season?
One thing that I realized now, and I realized a little bit then, but I really realize it now, is we're kind of basing our page count on like TV scripts of the day, right? So it's like you want to have like, a 30, maybe up to 35 page script for a half hour episode, no more than that. We should have had scripts that were like 20 pages long because we improved so much dialogue in there that one thing that I wish I could do is slow down the pace of the show, like write these scripts to be shorter so they could allow for more improv and character coming out of the people because we really cast the people. I mean, you've done interviews with a lot of the cast. The majority of them were not actors. Almost all of them were
Mhm.
not actors. And even the ones that were actors were people aspiring to be actors, not with a lot of acting experience. So I guess we would have explored more characters coming out of that improv and coming out of that story. And it was instrumental, our like street research, because we were always out in the Lower East Side shooting, trying to find, we edged up into the Village and other areas in New York, but mostly in the Lower East Side recording and shooting. A lot of it's lost. I wish I had it because originally I was just doing it with audio, just talking to people, and that inspired a lot of characters. Like Chaka and Mecca were kind of like a combo of three different girls, right? We met these three. It was Leora and Aurora, who I know you interviewed. Aurora. Leora unfortunately passed away.
Mhm.
Super sad. And then their friend named Satya.
Mhm.
And we were just like, they have really similar names, but Leora and Aurora, we thought it was funny that they had such similar. That's why we did Chaka and Mecca
Mhm.
with a similar cadence, but we kind of combined them because Leora and Satya had similar energy, like kind of were the more energetic ones, and Aurora was the innocent one. And so like, well, we can have one with high energy and one, innocent one, and that would work well together. I'm sure if we continued to do those street team kind of like just out in the world, we would have discovered more. That was probably my main concern of that show, is that it felt authentic, that it didn't feel like it was written in a writer's room, that it felt like people hanging out and talking the way people talk. And that's why we didn't correct a lot of things. In a lot of shows, though, they will really edit the track to influence the comedic timing and cut breaths out and extend things or cut things together from two takes. And we really tried to keep a natural cadence. That's why you'll see things that aren't like a traditional comedic timing remained in the show, where it's like, well, that's the way people talk. We're gonna leave it that way. If there's a flub or something, we're just gonna leave it in.
Regarding your original SVA student film that you made, that you kind of like loosely based MTV Downtown on.
Yeah,
So I know that you released like the intro publicly on your Instagram page.
yeah.
Is there anywhere where, fans can look at it in its entirety?
Maybe. I mean, no, there's not, but I could maybe post it. That intro it's funny because there's two aspects that are kind of like Downtown. And one of the reasons, I'd pitched, I think maybe four or five concepts to MTV. I did a development deal with them, which if you guys aren't familiar, if your audience isn't familiar, where they'll a blind development deal. It's like, yeah, they'll pay you like a flat rate to develop a certain amount of concepts for them that you then have to pitch them, but they'll own the concepts that you come up with. And I was real excited. That was a cool thing. I had pitched these ideas that were really didn't feel like MTV shows, were really bizarre. And at the end of the day, I was like, man, I know they like this student film I did. They can understand that I should probably do something like this student film. And
Mhm.
like that one page, which probably I could send it to you, or it's on my Instagram somewhere, of like just, it was only a one-page thing in my development deal that had a frame from my student film.
Mhm.
It's like a question, and I didn't even really know what the show was about. That's why I was like, it's going to be cinema verite. We're going to figure it out as we go. But I'll get back to that student film. The kids on the street part in the intro, that inspired like the kind of setting and the type of character in Downtown. But the second half, basically what the main character learns, they get screamed at by the old man. And then the mom says he has to visit his grandfather, and he goes to visit his grandfather in a nursing home, which he really doesn't want to do. And he's sitting around the table with three or four old folks in the nursing home telling stories about their history. And that's more like the conversational style of Downtown. The characters in the nursing home were just like there was, it was kind of meandering, but the journey that the main character takes is that by the end he goes back and he kind of waves. I didn't want to make it too like corny, like waves at the old dude, who
Mhm.
yelled at him. Doesn't hate him anymore. He hasn't fully come around.
Yeah.
But
Whether it's cut content, production trivia, or even hidden Easter eggs, what are some obscure facts about the show that you can share?
oh, here's a good one. All right. So I'll give you two right here. I don't. I might have talked about these already, so maybe they're not obscure. But you tell me.
All
You
right.
probably know more than I do. The so because our actors weren't actors, right? It sometimes in the booth it would get interesting, right? So I remember this one time having to break up a fight between Leora and Aurora because as we started to get into the show and as they started to become comfortable with their characters, uh, and because we didn't treat it like a normal show where, it's written and you kind of tell the actors what to do, and then they wait for a direction, and it was so different than how a show. First of all, it was my first show. It was no actors that really had experience, so the booth was a lot looser than any other show I've worked on. So we're recording and they're doing their takes or whatever. And then I think I'm trying to think of who spoke first, but I think Aurora might have tried to give Leora a direction on like, how to say her line. And then Leora responded by saying, you don't give me direction, you're my sidekick. And then she was like, I'm not your sidekick. And they started to go at it. We had to kind of separate them for a little bit.
That's
But
pretty
they were
funny.
probably like 16 or 17. I can't
Mhm.
remember how they were when we were doing this show. And they were New York. They were people who hung out on the street in New York at night
Mhm.
when New York, so it's not uncommon for people to do that.
Right.
Um, so that's, it was a little bit more and it wasn't anything horrible, just a little spat. But
Mhm.
so that's something I don't think I've talked about before. And then another thing is about the name, right? So we're working on this show, and then we find out that they're making a show out in LA called the Downtowners, right? That's also about like, people in their 20s in a city. And then MTV's like, we're gonna sue them. And I was like, man, don't sue them. Like, and I called around and I found out I knew a couple people who were working on the show, like Bill Schwab, who was one of my friends from Beavis and Butthead, had moved out to LA. He was working on as a character designer on it. He went on to become a fancy art director at Disney on Frozen and all sorts of successful movies. But I was like, I know people on that show. I don't want to be the guy that sued another cartoon. And they didn't listen and they sued them. And, because they found out that we had gone into production first. So they changed their name to Mission Hill. But I remember
Mhm.
thinking that it could have been cool for promotion because it was, if you have to think it, this was way before social media. I was like, I could see a story in TV Guide of like downtown and downtowners. Like, which one should you watch? And I was like, it might get more awareness to both shows if there's something interesting to talk about, but they weren't having it. And then another thing is then they were like, after all that, they're like, we're not going to be able to use the name downtown. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, that's the whole thing. And then basically the compromise was like, can we call it? Because I remember they were doing other shows that had MTV in front of them. Like, what about that show MTV Live? Like, what if we just put MTV in front of it? Because Live wasn't copyrightable, but MTV Live was. So it's like, what if we call it MTV Downtown? And they're like, yeah, but it always has to be in front of or above the title. So that's why that logo is designed in such a way where I'm like, I put it above but inset. And I was
Hmm.
like, I just want people to, I was like, it'll be listed as MTV Downtown, but the MTV will kind of just disappear and people will just call it Downtown
Hmm.
anyway. And that's what happened. So
Hmm.
the official copyrighted title is MTV Downtown, but I noticed even on IMDb it's just listed as Downtown, so
Right.
it stuck as the title.
Do you know the whereabouts of Gregory Gilmore, the voice actor for Alex?
You know, I used to run into him. You know, he had moved out to LA. Man, I might have an old email for him somewhere. I'd run into him. It was weird. He was working as a bartender in LA because I think he came out not too long after Downtown, and I ran into him in a bar. I went to the bar and he recognized me and he was like said something about Downtown. I was like, holy. And then we kept in touch for a little bit. He came to a couple parties at Tidmouse, and then just I went to that bar just got shut down at some point, and then I lost contact with him. So that, man, I'm trying to think it when it's got to be 10 years since I talked to him, but I could look and see if I have his info and get it to you because I'm
That'd
sure
be
you want
awesome.
an interview with him too.
Yeah, that'd be really great. Because one, he's one of my favorite characters on it on the
Yeah,
show.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And really, I mean, it was great. We based a lot. That's another thing that was good is we were able to kind of take some of the mannerisms that we noticed in the actors and apply them to the characters in the show. Like Mecca would, Aurora would kind of like push her hair behind her ear, and we had Mecca do that, and Alex would like rub the back of his neck sometimes. We'd have or Greg would do that, and then we'd have Alex do that. So it was like things that we picked up in the recording sessions. We kind of translate to the best of our ability into animation. Actually, that's one of the reasons I would love to have a shot at doing another version of this. Is you know the what ended up on the screen wasn't as subtle and nuanced as I would have liked to had it in my mind, and just the budget and the technology wasn't up to snuff that day for us to really get that super subtle acting. And I think we could now, with more experience and more available to us in the ways of just like being able to dial that stuff in a way that isn't as heavy on drawing count as it would have been back then. I think we could really nail those subtle mannerisms.
But yeah, yeah, I've been having a lot of trouble, tracking him down,
Yeah.
just because, I don't think he has any social media or anything like that. But yeah, it's a goal of mine to sort of like interview every actor that was involved in the show.
Yeah, well, both Leora and Goat,
And Goat, yeah,
my
passed away.
college buddy, who is kind of, and we've tried to put him. He's voiced characters of himself in two cartoons, and
Hmm.
then characters of himself have been played by other people, in other cartoons that are based on him. Both James Hetfield from Metallica and Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's brother, have
Mm,
voiced, characters based on Goat.
that's
So
really cool.
so I'll try after this and see if I can figure that out.
All right, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Let me mention something to you,
Hmm.
right? I want to talk about two things, right?
Okay. Hmm.
One is somebody maybe like a year ago had like messaged me on Instagram about downtown, and I promised them that I'd send them some stickers that I had from the original premiere. I still have a little grip of the OG stickers, the promotional stickers. And on the 25th anniversary, I'll send those out. If the person sees this, I can't remember. I couldn't find that message. I finally found those stickers. I couldn't find them at the time. So I'll send them out to you, person from Instagram, send some to you, and I'll send a couple to me. I don't know. I don't know how many I have, but I'll send like, I don't know, the first bunch of people who like ask for them, like message me on Instagram. I'll send you some of those stickers for free because I have them and they're going to be 25 years old, or they probably were printed 25 years ago. I don't know if they'll stick on something anymore, but they're, and then secondly, we are, due to, you know, this kind of recent popularity of downtown on TikTok and other YouTube, other places, we are in the process of, and probably will have this secured by the time this airs, or pretty close to, the rights to do t-shirts. So we're going to do some original Downtown t-shirts featuring the original art from the show. And you'll be able to find those on titmousestuff.com. So that's my plug. And maybe we'll have something up when this launches, maybe not. We just got to sort out the final details, but I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And I'll post those designs as soon as I can, and we'll post them on Titmouse Stuff for sure. And maybe if we have a link directly to those shirts, I'll send them to you if you want to add it to this YouTube or whatever, whatever this is going to be.
So that's very exciting stuff. Thank you for everything, Chris. It was a pleasure to interview you. I learned so much, and I'm pretty sure my audience will have also learned a lot. So thank you so much. All right. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.